My name is Chloe, I'm 32 years old, and I'm about to watch my father-in-law drink the poison his wife prepared for me. The glass is cool against my fingertips, the condensation a stark contrast to the heat rising in my chest. Across the polished mahogany table, my mother-in-law, Diane, is watching me with a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. It's a predatory gleam, the same one I saw when she first sized me up a year ago, deciding I was nothing more than a temporary amusement for her beloved son, Liam. She thinks she's won. She thinks this little dinner party is the final act in her play to get me out of their lives for good. What she doesn't know is that I'm not the star of this tragedy, I'm the director. And the final scene is about to play out exactly as I've planned. It all started, as most things do, with love. I met Liam at a small, independent gallery opening downtown on a rainy Thursday evening in October. I was the artist, a photographer whose work was finally getting a sliver of recognition after years of struggling to make ends meet. My series on the rugged, untamed Oregon coast, full of crashing waves and moody, fog-shrouded cliffs, was my soul laid bare on archival paper. Each photograph represented a piece of my journey, my struggles, my determination to succeed on my own terms. He wasn't a critic or a collector, just a man who stood before one of my pieces, a shot of a lone, weathered pine clinging to a cliffside for a full 10 minutes. I watched him from across the room, curious about what he saw in that image. When he finally turned to me, his eyes held a depth of understanding that made my breath catch. He saw the loneliness, the resilience, the quiet defiance in that tree, and in doing so, he saw me. He was kind, with a laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and he saw the world with a sense of wonder I thought had been drummed out of most adults by the harsh realities of life. He didn't care that I lived in a tiny, drafty apartment above a noisy bakery where the smell of fresh bread woke me at 4 in the morning, or that my bank account was a constant, nagging source of anxiety. He just cared about me, about my art, about the way my mind worked and the stories I told through my lens. The first 6 months were a whirlwind of stolen kisses in the rain, late-night talks fueled by cheap wine and expensive dreams, and the kind of profound happiness that feels fragile, like a soap bubble you're afraid to touch for fear it will burst. We dreamed of a future together, a life filled with art and purpose, far from the corporate world he was so desperate to escape. He spoke of his family's wealth not as a blessing, but as a gilded cage, a set of expectations he had no desire to fulfill. He wanted a life of meaning, not just of material success. And in me, he saw a partner who shared that vision. We spent weekends exploring hidden beaches, hiking through ancient forests, and talking about everything from philosophy to our favorite childhood memories. He told me about growing up in a house where love was conditional, where approval had to be earned through achievement and conformity. I told him about my own childhood, simpler but warmer, where my parents encouraged creativity even when they worried about my financial future. Then he said the 5 words that would change everything. I want you to meet my parents. Gerald and Diane Sterling were not just wealthy, they were a dynasty. Their name was etched onto buildings, hospital wings, and the glossy pages of society magazines. Their house wasn't a home, it was a museum, a cold and imposing fortress of glass and steel overlooking the city, filled with art they owned but didn't appreciate. It was a collection of assets, not a source of joy. The driveway alone was longer than the street I grew up on. From the moment I walked in, escorted by a silent housekeeper who looked at me with pity, I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Diane's handshake was limp and brief, her manicured nails digging slightly into my palm as her eyes scanned my simple, elegant black dress with a look of faint disgust. It was the best thing I owned, a vintage piece I'd found at a consignment shop and had tailored to fit, and it felt like a cheap costume under her gaze. Gerald, a man who seemed to be carved from granite and ambition, didn't even bother with the pretense of a smile. He just grunted a hello and asked Liam, in a voice that boomed with authority, what he was thinking, bringing a hobbyist into their world. The word hung in the air, a deliberate, calculated insult designed to put me in my place from the very beginning. That first dinner was an interrogation disguised as a meal. The dining room was cavernous, the table so long that conversation felt like shouting across a canyon. Every question was a tiny dagger designed to find a weakness to expose me as the unworthy gold digger they had already decided I was. They asked about my family, my education, my income, my plans for the future. I answered honestly, my voice steady even as my insides churned with a mixture of anger and humiliation. I told them my parents were teachers, dedicated educators who had instilled in me a love of learning and a strong work ethic. I told them I had a degree in fine arts from a state university, not an Ivy League institution, and that my photography was my passion and my profession. Diane's smile was a thin, cruel line. "How quaint," she'd murmured, swirling her wine glass. "To have a passion. But passion doesn't pay the bills, does it, dear? And surely you understand that Liam has certain responsibilities, certain expectations." Gerald nodded in agreement, his eyes cold and assessing. They exchanged a look, a silent communication that spoke volumes. I was not good enough. I was a project, a rebellious phase Liam was going through. They made it clear they expected him to marry someone from their world, someone with a pedigree and a trust fund, someone whose family name opened doors, someone who wasn't me. Liam, to his credit, defended me. He held my hand tightly under the table, his thumb rubbing circles on my skin, a silent apology for his parents' cruelty. "Chloe is a brilliant artist," he'd said, his voice firm and unwavering. "And she's the best thing that's ever happened to me. I don't care about your expectations or your plans for my life. I'm building my own future, and it's with her." The silence that followed was deafening. Diane's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Gerald simply stared at his son as if he were a stranger. But the seed of doubt had been planted, not in my love for Liam, or his for me, but in the viability of our future. Could our love survive in such a toxic, corrosive environment? Could we build a life together while constantly battling the people who should have been our family? We decided it could. We decided that their approval was not a prerequisite for our happiness. We got married a year later, a small, intimate ceremony on the coast, at the very spot where I'd taken the photograph of the lone pine that had brought us together. We exchanged vows with the sound of the ocean as our witness, surrounded by a small group of our closest friends and my family. My parents cried tears of joy, embracing Liam as the son they'd always wanted. Liam's parents were invited, of course. They declined, citing a prior, unavoidable commitment that we both knew was fabricated. We both knew the real reason. They were hoping that by ignoring our marriage, they could make it disappear, that Liam would eventually come to his senses and return to the fold. But our love was not a mirage. It was real, and it was strong. We rented a small house with a yard for a dog we planned to adopt, a cozy place with creaky floors, and a fireplace that actually worked. I continued to build my photography business, taking on commercial gigs to supplement the income from my art. Liam, who had always felt suffocated by his father's relentless expectations for him to join the family's corporate empire, started his own small environmental consulting firm focused on sustainable development. We were happy. We were building a life on our own terms, a life that was authentic and meaningful even if it meant financial struggles and long hours. But the Sterlings were not ones to give up easily. Their attacks became more subtle, more insidious, a campaign of psychological warfare designed to break us down. Diane would call Liam at all hours, her voice dripping with faux concern, asking if he was sure about his choices, if he wasn't missing out on the life he was meant to have. She would send him articles about the financial instability of artists and small business owners, always with a little note attached. "Just thought you should see this, darling. It's never too late to reconsider." One afternoon, she showed up at my studio unannounced, dressed in a Chanel suit that cost more than my entire camera setup. She walked around the small space, a look of pity on her face, touching my equipment as if it were contaminated. "It's cozy," she said, running a finger over a dusty bookshelf. She picked up one of my prints, a piece that had just won a local award and had been featured in a regional magazine. "This is nice, I suppose. But have you ever considered a more stable career? Real estate, perhaps? I have friends who could help you get started. You could make real money, not just scrape by." It was a clear message: your dreams are worthless, your efforts are futile, and you will never be good enough for my son. Gerald's tactics were more direct and far more damaging. He tried to sabotage us financially and professionally. A gallery that had promised me a solo show, a career-defining opportunity that could have launched me into the national art scene, suddenly and inexplicably pulled out. The curator, a woman I'd worked with for months, wouldn't even return my calls. I later found out, through a mutual contact, that Gerald was a major donor to their parent institution and had made it clear that my show was unacceptable. A potential client for Liam's firm, a major contract that would have secured his business for a year and allowed us to finally breathe financially, backed out at the last minute, mentioning a vague conflict of interest that I knew pointed directly back to Sterling Industries. They were trying to starve us out, to make our independent life so difficult, so financially precarious, that we would have no choice but to come crawling back to them, defeated and broken. They wanted to prove that without their money and influence, we were nothing, that our dreams were foolish fantasies that would inevitably crumble under the weight of reality. Then came the dinner invitation. It arrived on expensive stationery, delivered by courier. It was for Liam's birthday, a small family gathering at their house. I knew it was a trap. I knew they had something planned, some final humiliation designed to drive a wedge between us once and for all. But Liam, ever the optimist, wanted to believe it was an olive branch. He wanted to believe his parents were finally ready to accept me, to accept our life and our choices. "Maybe they've changed, Chloe," he said, his eyes pleading with me to give them one more chance. "Maybe they're finally ready to try. It's been over a year. Maybe they've realized they were wrong." So I agreed to go, for him. Because I loved him and I wanted him to have a relationship with his parents, even if I knew deep down that leopards don't change their spots. I put on my armor, a new dress I couldn't really afford but bought anyway because I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me look defeated and prepared for battle. And that brings us to tonight, to this dinner. The air is thick with unspoken tension, a palpable hostility masked by forced politeness. Diane has been overly solicitous, constantly refilling my wine glass, her smile never wavering, her voice a sugary sweetness that sets my teeth on edge. She keeps talking about a new health supplement she's been taking, how it gives her so much energy, how it's changed her life. She even offered me a fine white powder she dissolved in a glass of water with a theatrical flourish. I politely declined, citing a sensitivity to supplements. But then, as she was pouring me another glass of wine, her back momentarily to the rest of the table as she reached for the bottle on the sideboard, I saw it. A flicker of movement, a quick, almost imperceptible motion of her hand as she passed my glass back to me. A tiny dusting of white powder, just like the supplement, disappearing into the deep red of the Merlot. My stomach dropped. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was happening. She was trying to drug me. I didn't know what was in the powder, whether it was a laxative designed to humiliate me, a sedative to make me appear drunk and unstable, or something worse. But I knew it wasn't for my health. It was to make me sick, to embarrass me in front of Liam, to prove to him that I was unstable, that I couldn't handle the pressure of their world, that I was a liability he needed to cut loose. I felt a surge of cold, clear anger, sharper than anything I'd ever felt before. I would not be their victim. I would not let them win. Not this time. Not ever. I picked up my glass, my hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I swirled the wine, watching the light catch the crimson liquid, buying myself a moment to think. I looked at Diane, and for the first time that evening, I allowed a small, knowing smile to play on my lips. "You know, Diane," I said, my voice calm and even, my words cutting through the strained dinner conversation like a knife. "I think Gerald has been looking a little tired lately. All that stress at the office, all those late nights. Maybe he could use a little pick-me-up. Don't you think he deserves some of that wonderful energy you've been talking about?" And with a grace I didn't know I possessed, I reached across the table and swapped my glass with his. It was a simple, fluid motion, over in a second, as natural as passing the salt. Diane's eyes widened in shock, a flicker of pure panic in their depths. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She was frozen, unable to stop what was happening without revealing her own guilt. Gerald, engrossed in a lecture to Liam about a recent stock market fluctuation and completely oblivious to the silent drama unfolding, didn't even notice. He just picked up the glass I had placed in front of him and took a long, deep drink, nodding along to his own monologue. I sat back in my chair, my heart still pounding, but a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me like a cold wave. The trap had been sprung, but the prey had become the hunter. Now, all I had to do was wait and watch the consequences of Diane's own actions unfold. It didn't take long. About 20 minutes into the main course, a decadent lobster thermidor that tasted like ash in my mouth, Gerald started to look pale. A sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead, glistening under the chandelier light. He put down his fork with a clatter, a look of confusion and discomfort on his face. "Are you all right, dear?" Diane asked, her voice a little too high, a little too bright, the panic barely concealed beneath the veneer of concern. Gerald just shook his head, a hand going to his stomach. He tried to stand up, but swayed dangerously, knocking over his water glass. The crystal shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing through the silent room like a gunshot, echoing the shattering of Diane's carefully constructed facade. Liam rushed to his side, genuine concern etched on his face. "Dad, what's wrong? Should I call a doctor?" Gerald couldn't answer. He just groaned, a low, guttural sound of distress, and stumbled towards the bathroom, one hand braced against the wall for support. We could hear him being violently ill, the sounds echoing through the cavernous, silent house, a brutal testament to the consequences of Diane's scheme. Diane, for the first time since I had met her, looked genuinely terrified. Her carefully constructed mask had shattered completely, revealing the panicked, desperate woman underneath. She had been caught in her own web of deceit, hoisted by her own petard. Liam helped his father to a guest room after the worst had passed, while I stayed with Diane in the deafening silence of the dining room. She wouldn't look at me. She just stared at her plate, her hands trembling, her face ashen. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The silence was my accusation, my judgment, my victory. She knew that I knew, and she knew that I had turned her own weapon against her, that her plan had backfired spectacularly. Later, as Liam was helping his still pale and weakened father into a taxi to take him to the hospital for observation, Gerald looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes, just a grudging, bewildered respect, and perhaps a hint of fear. He knew he had been outplayed. He had underestimated me. He had seen me as a pawn in their game, but I had shown him I was a queen, capable of strategic thinking and ruthless self-defense. In the car on the way home, Liam was quiet, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. He finally turned to me in the driveway of our little house, his voice low and strained. "You knew, didn't you? You knew she was going to do something." I just nodded, the adrenaline finally leaving me, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and a strange sense of sadness. I told him everything, the powder, the swap, the look on his mother's face. He listened, his expression a storm of anger, hurt, betrayal, and a dawning, horrified understanding of the depths of his parents' manipulation and the lengths they were willing to go to destroy our marriage. That night was a turning point. The war was not over, but a major battle had been won. The Sterlings had learned that I was not a pushover, not a victim waiting to be crushed. I was a fighter, and I would do whatever it took to protect my husband and the life we were building together, brick by brick, against all odds. The aftermath was a cold war of silence. Diane and Gerald didn't call. We didn't reach out. The space between us was a chasm of unspoken truths and bitter resentment. Then, a few weeks later, a thick manila envelope arrived by certified mail. It was from Gerald's lawyer. Inside was a deed to the house we were renting, the title transferred to our names free and clear, and legal documents establishing a substantial trust fund for our future children. There was no note, no apology, no explanation, just a clean, unconditional transfer of assets. It was Gerald's way of surrendering, a white flag raised on a battlefield of his own making. He couldn't control us, so he was trying to buy peace to ensure his legacy, to secure his place in the lives of any future grandchildren. But we were not for sale, and we would never forget what they had tried to do. We accepted the house not as a gift, but as reparations for the pain and suffering they had caused. It was a small price for the emotional damage, the sabotaged opportunities, the sleepless nights. And then we made an announcement of our own. I was pregnant. We were having a baby. A new generation, a new beginning, free from the toxic legacy of the Sterling name and the weight of their expectations. Our daughter, Eliza, was born in the summer. She was a tiny, perfect bundle of joy, a symbol of our love and our resilience and our refusal to be broken. When Diane and Gerald came to the hospital, they were different, subdued, humbled. They held the baby with a reverence that bordered on fear, as if she were made of glass. They had lost. The future was no longer theirs to control. It was ours, and we would raise our daughter with love, acceptance, and the freedom to choose her own path. Years have passed since that night. My photography career has flourished beyond my wildest dreams. I opened my own gallery in the heart of the city, my work celebrated for its raw, honest beauty and emotional depth. Liam's business is thriving, and he's become a respected voice in environmental policy, making a real difference in the world. We have built a life filled with love, laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing we did it our way, on our terms, without compromise. The relationship with the Sterlings has settled into a fragile, distant peace. They are grandparents to Eliza, but they are not a part of our daily lives. The boundaries have been drawn, clear and uncrossable, and they have learned, finally, to respect them. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that dinner table. The clinking of the glasses, the look of shock on Diane's face, the taste of victory as bitter and as sweet as the wine I didn't drink. It wasn't a revenge I had sought, but it was a justice I had earned through vigilance and courage. I didn't win by playing their game, by stooping to their level of manipulation and deceit. I won by refusing to play at all, by standing my ground and protecting what mattered most. And that, I've come to realize, is the most satisfying revenge of all. Living well, not as a performance for them, but as a testament to myself and to everyone who has ever been told they weren't good enough. My name is Chloe, and this is my story. Not of a victim, but of a survivor. A wife. A mother. A woman who refused to be broken by the cruelty of others. A woman who won not through violence or vengeance, but through strength, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to her own truth. I am a testament to the fact that the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. It is to rise above them, to build a life so full of love and joy and purpose that their bitterness cannot touch you, cannot diminish you, cannot define you. It is to create your own definition of success, and to live it, every single day, with courage and grace. And in the end, that is a victory that no amount of money can buy, and no amount of poison can destroy. It is the quiet, unshakable triumph of a life well lived, a life chosen, a life earned, and it is mine. I remember the exact moment I realized I had truly won. It wasn't at the dinner table when Gerald drank from that glass. It wasn't when the deed to our house arrived. It wasn't even when Eliza was born. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, 3 years after that fateful dinner. I was in my gallery, hanging a new collection, when a young woman walked in. She couldn't have been more than 25, dressed in thrift store clothes that reminded me of my younger self. She stood in front of one of my photographs for a long time, tears streaming down her face. When I approached her, she turned to me and said something I'll never forget. She said my work had given her the courage to leave an abusive relationship to pursue her own dreams despite everyone telling her she wasn't good enough. In that moment, I understood that my victory wasn't just personal. It was bigger than me, bigger than the Sterlings, bigger than that one night of quiet rebellion. The years have taught me that revenge is not about destruction. It's about transformation. Every time I open my gallery doors, every time I teach a workshop to aspiring photographers, every time I tuck Eliza into bed and tell her she can be anything she wants to be, I am taking what the Sterlings tried to destroy and turning it into something beautiful. That is the ultimate revenge. Not making them suffer, but proving them wrong in the most profound way possible. Diane and Gerald are older now. I see the regret in their eyes when they visit, though they'll never voice it. They see what they almost destroyed, what they could have been part of from the beginning if only they had chosen love over control. They see Eliza, bright and creative and confident, and they know she is everything they tried to prevent. She is the living proof that their way was wrong. Last Christmas, Diane pulled me aside. It was the first time we'd been alone together since that dinner. She didn't apologize, not directly. Instead, she said something that surprised me. She said she wished she had been braver when she was my age, that she had let fear and expectation dictate her entire life. She said she saw in me the woman she could have been. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's enough. My name is Chloe. I'm 35 now. I have a daughter who believes she can change the world. I have a husband who chose love over legacy. I have a career built on passion and persistence. And I have a story that reminds me every single day that the best revenge is not just living well. It's living authentically, courageously, and on your own terms. That is my victory. That is my revenge. And it is sweeter than anything I could have imagined.